Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Actually, I'm amazed that not more people are here in the front row, because this is the most gentle, nice man I know, so you don't have to be afraid of him, because and probably you will know that, and otherwise you will find out in the coming hour. Yay, thank you.
Here comes Mohammed, hey!
It's really my honor and pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon for, I hope, a very inspirational conversation between my dear friend Michael Obstrup and Salome Yaché. They will speak about the book of Michael, titled The Uncertainty. And it doesn't speak about the uncertain times we are living in, but it speaks about how difficult it is to work with living real people, because they always do unexpected things, and unexpected things are happening over the course of their lives and then also in the film. So I hope you have a wonderful conversation here this afternoon, and please take it away, but not before you get a big hand from the audience, please.
Hello, good afternoon. For me, it is also a huge honor to be talking to Michael today about his freshly published book, The Uncertainty, a book about character-driven documentary. And Michael, I'm sure most of you know Michael very well, but for those of you who don't know, he's an independent specialist in international film project development, workshop planning, and he tutors almost everywhere, like Ex-Oriente Film Workshop or Baltic Sea Forums. He's been a selector for IDFA Forum project since many years. And he has worked earlier as a producer some years ago, and he was the head of studies at European Documentary Network. I met Michael over a decade ago when I was a total new to the industry, and it was for me like walking in the darkness. I had no idea where I was, what I was doing in terms of the industry, and you were really like a lighthouse among us, very few other tutors who enlightened my way into this
And you
industry.
know what I remember from that time?
Yeah.
We were at the workshop, and we had a break. I think there was some technical stuff that happened, and so we didn't quite know what to do. And then we decided that we will tell the English jokes that we knew. And I only know two, and I'll be happy to share them if we have the time. They're really, really bad. And then one of them, I told them, and other people laughed and so on. And then 30 seconds later, you laughed.
Really?
Because it took a little time for you to get it. I remember that because you have the most wonderful laughter in the world, Salome. So that's a memory from those days. Yeah.
But since then, I've learned to understand jokes earlier,
Okay.
from earlier on. So yeah, anyway, congratulations on this book, a very useful, a very handy book, I should say, for the filmmakers, which is called The Uncertainty. And I want to ask you about the title of the book. Why uncertainty? What do you mean by this?
Yeah. It didn't start as with that title. It started as a book about creating documentary, a book about creating character-driven documentary. And you know, since as you said, I meet a lot of film teams, and I always criticize their titles because it's not lively enough. And then someone looked at me and said, a book about creating character-driven documentary. So then I had to find out that I had to change it. Then it became The Uncertainty of, and then it ended up just with The Uncertainty, which I actually like a lot. It's the essence of the book, because I write a lot about what I call the art, the only art beyond our control, beyond the control of the creators. It might not be the only one, but I think it is. And that is, of course, when you make a film about characters. No, you make a film about persons, because they are the ones who are out there in reality, and it's only throughout the creation process that they become characters. And as Adrik said, We have no control of what they do. And that uncertainty, I find, in the beginning, in my earlier years, I found it a big problem because it creates so much problems for us, you know? A writer just writes a book. A fiction scriptwriter writes a script. They're totally in control of the process. We are totally not in control of the process. And I thought it was very, very difficult to handle until I found out that is, of course, the beauty of documentary. That is why documentaries turn out the way they do, that we have to find our way to deal with the uncertainty. I hope we can come back to that. But that was a reason for the book. And then it also touches upon my own insecurity with writing the book. Because I've been with so many directors, and I always told myself, you have to remember how vulnerable they are, Mikael. You have to remember. And now, now I've tried it. And I didn't sleep the whole night before for instance, there's a chapter about editing.
Yeah.
And there's another Dane here, I'm sure you have met him, who just wrote a book about order and chaos. And he's a good friend of mine. He edited several of the films that I produced. We used to have a company together, and I just didn't dare, to walk the dark streets of Copenhagen one night and then meeting Niels P. Andersen without having shown him the. And I didn't sleep the night before. I have a chapter about editing. I know absolutely nothing about editing. And so that's also that uncertainty. The final uncertainty I was just thinking about, because I had a premiere of a film at IDFA in the biggest cinema hall, The German Secret. We're back in 2004, I think. And we were so happy that it was the biggest cinema hall. And very few people showed up. And I was just thinking about when I was sitting here. So thank you very much for showing up. It helps a lot. It really helps a lot.
Now you're in the most vulnerable position right now.
Yes, it's terrible, and we are very nervous, both of us. But we'll find our ways out of it.
Yeah, but as I wrote out some quotes from the book. So
okay.
If I can say, uncertainty is imperative for the outcome. It's not a problem. And I love this quote. It is really imperative, really important.
Yes.
But what inspired you to write the book? Why did you decide to do it, and who did you have in mind when you were writing it?
I have to go a little back in time, because I read a book about a Danish physicist called Niels Bohr, who is the father of quantum mechanics. And that's like 20 years ago. And he writes about, I can never remember how I put it, so excuse me. He writes about complementarity, a contradiction where the two sides of an issue both complement and exclude each other. That was very, very inspiring for me. It colored the way I look at life. I write a little about it in the book, for instance, how we pursue happiness. And it would be a catastrophe if we actually got happy, because happy people stand still. We don't move. Who wants to leave paradise of your own free will? It's the same with doubt. We try to get rid of our doubts, but it's a catastrophe if we do, because people without doubt are really, really dangerous people, and they're also very boring to be with. But so that combination of trying to achieve something, knowing that you cannot, that was an inspiration for my own way of looking at life. And then gradually I understood that that is exactly the same with documentary film. Because I think you have to make firm decisions about what your film is about, while knowing that it's 100% sure that you will have to adjust it. Because if you just go out in the uncertainty, without knowing where you want to go, I'm sure you won't find your way. Maybe you're a director, you can tell me differently, but that's how I sort of see it, that will, at least it will make it more difficult to find your way. But if you take decisions all the time and then change them, when your meeting with reality tells you to change it. That's what sort of, now I'm getting to your question. There is a last chapter in the book. It's called Goodbye, and it's half a page, and it's very small pages, as you can see. And there was one morning I was at a workshop in Prague, and I have a good colleague of mine, Ika Vekkalahti, that I'm sure many of you know. And I woke up in the morning, and I got this epiphany. Now I know what character-driven documentary is all about. So I wrote it down, and I sent an email to Ika, and I wrote in the, I remember I wrote in the subject text, I was intellectual this morning. And then I met him a little later, and he said, I read it 4 times, I don't understand a word. And that sort of made, that's what triggered it. That's 1.5 years ago. I said, maybe I should extend it a little.
And make it more understandable.
And make a little more, and this is the result
so
of
it
that.
came in a dream, in a way, this...
Well, thank you very much, but not really. But
who did you write it for? Like, who's the target audience? Like,
yeah, it's a very targeted target audience.
Yeah.
Because it's for the creators of character-driven documentary film.
Yeah. I think when I read it, I think it's super useful for those who are starting their way into the field, but it's also very useful for those who are starting a new project and need to refresh a little bit what to expect in the years to come as they're making the film. And yeah, I would like to show the index of your book.
Yes.
And yeah, even if the book is about uncertainty, actually, as you see, the index is extremely structured. It's very structured, very clear what to expect.
I used to be a producer, you know. Yes.
Yeah, but from very early on, from the beginning of the book, the book is called the book about the character-driven documentary, but then you question, character-driven, what does it mean? Like, what is a character and what is driven? What do you mean by a character-driven documentary, and how does it differ from other kinds of films?
Yeah. It's one of the last chapters I wrote. You know, I was going through the book for, I don't know, you know, the 100th time, and then suddenly it came in, what if people, because one of the things, another reason for writing the book is that from my discussions with filmmakers, I very, very often understand that we use the same words, but we mean something completely different. So it struck me that maybe I should, have a chapter about how do I see character-driven documentaries.
No, it's true, because when I read the title, I really thought, what is a character-driven documentary?
Yeah. And I had produced character-driven documentaries for many years without thinking about what is a character, for instance.
Yeah.
What does it mean that the film is driven by the character?
Yeah, and driven, exactly. And then a character is the human, or it can be something else, or
Yeah, and that's why I put someone who read the book said, isn't it wrong with the 2 question marks after character and driven? But it is actually intentional.
Yeah.
And that's also something that is very interesting about a process, because it was only through writing that chapter that I found out how I actually understand character. I never formulated it in my head before.
So how do you understand the character?
It's a person that on the screen comes with a past, a present, and a future. That's how I understand character, and it doesn't matter whether, it's not about agreeing or not, it's just how I see it. And what I mean by that is that we meet the person in the present time, of course. Otherwise, it couldn't be character-driven. But we do not understand the presence if we don't understand the past. So I think it's always one of the tricky things with character-driven films. How do we, through filming the present, get an understanding of the past? And when we talk about developing, the future is represented by, as I see it, something that the character needs to do. It can be an obstacle, it can be a problem, it can be a catastrophe that you need to overcome, it can be a trauma that you need to overcome, it can be a dream that you want to achieve, but there's something that makes the character move forward.
And drive the film.
And drive.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where we come to the drive, because that means that a dream that the character wants to achieve or something you want to overcome becomes the drive of the film. And I think that is the essence of spotting when you think, I want to make this film about Salome, that I need to spot that something will happen. I don't know what, but there's something in your past or your present that will make you do something to achieve something, and that's the future of you and the drive of the film. So that's how I understand character-driven film.
Okay, and what is not a character-driven film?
All the things that I didn't mention now.
So I come to my...
No,
yeah.
I mean, very often journalists don't make character-driven films because they are diving into a subject, into a theme, and the journalist is making the film progress. That's not a character-driven film, in my understanding.
And I think we will come to another element of character-driven documentary in a little while.
Okay.
But before, I have my favorite question to you. So I quote, events happen, stories are created, events take place in the real world, and stories take place in art. So probably one of the most frequent questions a filmmaker is asked, what is a story about the film, right? Yeah. Now it's my turn to ask to you. What is this story?
If you had asked me 15 years ago, I would have given you a very concrete question, because I studied I studied script writing at the Danish film schools many years ago, and I was taught a very formative story understanding. And I still use it a lot, actually. But I understand over the years that if I use it too, literally, it will be a catastrophe. So now I have to approach it more like something that makes the film progress. I know this is much more fluffy than a dramaturgical schedule, and I still use plot points. That's what I learned at the film school. I still use it in my analysis of if I feel there's something in the... I actually use it a lot in my analysis of a project in development. And I don't know if you do the same, but it's sometimes when something's not working, it's nice to have something to return to and say, maybe it's because the plot point isn't there at that time. But I think it's a catastrophe if that dramaturgical skeleton is visible in the final film. It's something that you can use in the creative process, but if I can see it as an audience, it doesn't work, because then it's too simple.
It's too constructed.
It's simply too simple. And it's also that I feel that, because I've also seen this desperate look in the eyes of directors who have just pitched at IDFA. And then the first question is, what's the story?
Yeah,
and they go, I don't know, because it hasn't happened yet. Yeah. But I think the question comes not out of simplicity. I think it comes out of that this, whatever we call it, that potentially drives the film forward is not clear. I think that's where the question origins from.
Yeah. Well, when I first pitched, it was my first real pitch, and I pitched this project some decade ago, and somebody asked, "What is the story?"
Yes.
And I said, "There is no story." And this was like the table full of commissioning editors, and I gave the most wrong answer.
Probably.
Probably. And I was thinking that it's okay that there is no story, but then with the experience, I learned that a story can be anything. It doesn't have to be a development as such. Even like small cores that kind of move the film forward, even small as a backbone, is totally enough. And then on this backbone, you build on something else. That is, for me, the real story behind the core story, right?
Yes, and I also think that very often when someone asks us what's the story, we sort of hear it as a question for some words. But come on, this is film. So a story, if we use that word, can be told in sound and pictures without any word, you know.
Yes, of course.
So that's very important but there is still a progression in the film.
Yeah. Yes.
And you know what's funny? It's because we've known each other for so many years, and know as a filmmaker, it's difficult to see exactly what your story is. But we were tutors together a couple of years ago, and you asked the filmmakers all the time, so what's the story? And I was like, come on, sell me.
It's a challenging question.
Right?
I mean, it's good to ask it, it's good to think about it, try to answer it, you know, it's not always possible to answer it when you're doing it, but so at some point we will open the floor to the questions, so if you think about your questions. And then I would like to speak about a little bit with you. There is a chapter about, this comes right after directing, actually, about subtext.
Yeah.
And this is my favorite chapter, honestly, because this is my favorite part in filmmaking in general. How did something fall? No, we're okay.
Or someone.
Did someone fall? So how does one sense a subtext? Or maybe you can say what you mean by subtext briefly. I think we all kind of understand what it is, but how does one sense a subtext, and how does one express it in the film? And do you see many projects that you tutor a lot? Do you see many projects that kind of lack this subtext?
Yeah. The first part of your question, I think, is very interesting because we're talking about it in documentary film. In fiction, that's what you do when you write the lines, that you try to write a line that holds a subtext, of course. So you're very conscious about it. The thing about subtext with real people, I'm sure some of the most important subtext about you deals with issues that you're maybe not that proud of or you don't want us to see, so you're trying to hide it. Because maybe it deals with something that you're uncomfortable with, or something in your past that you don't want us to know about, or maybe even traumatic, or you've been a bad person to another person 10 years ago, or, you know. So we're trying to hide it. So I think it's in documentary filmmaking, it's even more interesting to talk about because it's so difficult to see. But I have a little example in my book that for me illustrates the issues about subtext. Where if you imagine me sitting in my living room with my daughter and my son, and then I turn to my daughter and say, you cannot imagine how proud it makes me to be your father. So you're in that room with your camera, Salome. And you need to decide where to put the camera. I think we have a tendency of putting the camera where the action is. That would be me, because I'm the one who's saying the sentence. You could also choose to put it at my daughter, and then the subtext of that scene would probably be that she's very proud.
Yes.
She's happy, you know. Maybe it's the first time I told her, you know.
Yeah.
You could also turn it to my son.
And that's when the subtext comes.
That's where a totally different subtext comes in, because maybe I never told him how proud it made me to be his father. So the subtext is something that, of course, we find it in the editing room, but the DOP, and you know because you're a DOP, you have to be aware of what is the subtext of the scene while you're filming, because that defines the position of the camera. It defines everything. So analyze, being together with your characters long enough for you to have an understanding of the subtext is very, very important. But the thing is, of course, that it also then limits you in the editing room.
In what way?
Well, what if you got the subtext wrong?
Yeah.
You know, what if you find out 3 months later that is not the subtext, maybe not the subtext of my family, but also not the subtext that you actually end up with in your storytelling? Then the scene becomes very difficult to use. So that is what I understand by subtext.
Yeah.
And I just have to mention one thing before we move on. I love my children dearly. It was a made-up example.
But it was a
just
very
in
good.
case, you know.
It was a really good and very clear example.
Yeah.
But just to elaborate a little bit on the subtext, so I see it on two levels. So one is the subtext of the character, their life, and their life experience. But is there also a subtext that comes from the filmmaker,
Yeah.
from their own experience, from their own vision, that maybe does not have a direct, it's not directly connected to what is being filmed?
What do you think?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I thought so. But and what? Say something about what does that mean that it comes from the director? Because that is different from the example that I just mentioned. Right?
Yeah. Well. I think that we, as filmmakers, we have a certain vision of life. We have certain sensibilities, right?
Yeah.
And we choose our subjects according to our sensibilities. We don't just film anything, right, that comes in our way. We really make very clear choices with which we need to stick for another 4 years, probably, or more, or less, quite some time. So I think it's, for me, this subtext comes very much from the relationship between this sensibility of the filmmaker, the vision, the understanding, the values that we have, and then what we see, right? For me, the enjoyable part of making a film is exactly finding this connection.
Yeah. But that's another contradiction. I deal a lot with contradictions in the book, and I feel that's another, at least doubleness, that there is subtext, there is an anthropological reading in a way, which is what I just mentioned with my children, and then there's the connection to the director, which is another thing. So subtext is not a physical thing. It's something that it's very difficult to get your hands on.
Yeah, it's quite intuitive as well.
Yeah, exactly. But in my book, I thank some people. I'm not quoting anyone because that would make them responsible for my interpretation of what they told me, and that would not be so good. But Emma Davey is a wonderful Scottish director, and she was one of those that I consulted, and she said exactly the same as you did. So, but that's...
But another question that comes with this subtext thing, and the subtext that comes from the author, is how... because we can have our prejudices and values, right? And is there a danger that we impose our own understanding of the world and use the subject, use the story to kind of justify our beliefs?
Yes. I think there is a big danger. But one of the reasons why I have been in the documentary world for 40 years is that I think that the ethics of documentary filmmakers is, in general, fantastic. So I think that we take that responsibility very, very serious, and I really think we have to do, because people invite us into their lives, which is the ultimate trust, and we have to pay it back. But I do think that I also have some references to journalism in my book, and I think that what maybe characterizes a journalistic approach is that if you are a journalistic director and you show the film to your characters, and they say, yes, this is what happened, then I think you probably have met your success criteria. But if you, as a documentary director, shows your film to a character, to the characters in your film, and they say, yes, this is what happened, but I just never thought about it that way. I would imagine that could be a success criteria for you, because that means that you have not just exposed the actual events, but you have, what's it called? Sorry, I forgot the word. But you have read the subtext of their life, interpreted the subtext of their life. That is a very, very, very big responsibility.
Yes.
I think it is what we do, and I think it's what we should do, because that's what makes your film about some characters different. If another director made a film about the same characters, but you have to stay true to how they see their lives. But if you read the subtext of their lives, they will understand their lives differently. The ethical element of that, I think, is that they will have to live with your understanding for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a problem, as we know, right?
Absolutely. So it's a huge responsibility. And I think the only thing you can do is that you can feel that, yes, I really think that this is the subtext of their lives, and you can show it to them, and if they say, yes, I just didn't think of it that way, that's what you can do. But there is a huge responsibility in subtext, but I think it's what we do with the example before as a DOP, and it's also what you do in the editing, of course, because scene number 19 colors scene number 35, and that means that there's a subtext in scene 35 that comes from your editing.
Yeah.
So it's really, very interesting.
Yeah, it is a really interesting
it's so
subject, so we
yeah.
can speak about it forever, for a long
Yes,
time.
yes.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. But yeah, I wonder if maybe somebody from the audience has a question to Mikael. Yep, please.
Mikael, the way you describe characters, first of all, I'm really thankful for you distinguishing between persons and characters. That was an eye-opener for me. Thank you very much. I will take that with me. But also, the way you describe characters in the storytelling, do you see any difference between the function of the characters in documentaries versus in fiction? I know you've been working with fiction as well.
I haven't really worked with fiction, but I've been in a company where we produce fiction films as well. And if we talk about the element of character-driven, I don't distinguish between fiction, which is character-driven, and documentary, which is character-driven. I think we have the same driving in both, and I think that we probably have the same experience. The big difference is that I quite often have discussions with people who don't differ between fiction and documentary because it's just film. Maybe one of you have seen Jon Bang Carlsen's film that is here. He's a good friend of mine. He's a Danish director, and he's one of the directors that I disagree the most with because he doesn't distinguish. For me, I have to find, because Niels P. Andersen, he said something when he was introducing his film. The authentic now. And
That's your notebook.
sorry?
Is that your notebook?
It was a receipt. That was the only piece of paper I had when he said when he presented his book. That's what you get from documentary film. You do not get that from fiction. At least I don't.
The authentic now.
The authentic now.
No, that's a really cool
And
phrase,
the
yeah.
authentic now, for me, it is when I forget that I'm watching a film. When I feel that I'm in the room with the persons that I'm seeing on the screen. And I know there are some people who don't think that we should forget that we're watching a film. For me, it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, we should.
And
forget,
that's
of
why I've
course.
written a book about character-driven. So that difference is very, very, very important for me. And sometimes I've found out that something that I thought was documentary wasn't, and I get aggressive.
Really? You get angry?
Yes, because I feel that they have misused my emotions. Because they have made me identify part of my involvement in a film. I know that it's real people. They have gone through this, you know. This 18-year-old Iranian girl who was forced to marry a 50-year-old man by her father. Part of my emotional identification is that I know she lives. It's not just a good story. That is, to come back to your question, Hjalmar, that is for me the fundamental difference.
I see. That's interesting what you say, because this year, and since we're not really mentioning here names and films, there was a film that I saw that starts as it is a documentary in a way, but then you realize that it's set up. But I was fascinated by it.
Well, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about that. No. I can be fascinated by, not as much, but I can be fascinated by a fiction film. No, that's not the problem. But I am not fascinated in the same way as I am. I'm just saying there is a difference.
Yeah.
And if it's not clear for me when I'm watching the film, what is what is it? If they're trying to tell me that it's something different, and then I find out that it's not, that's where I become aggressive, because I feel that it was a violation of my emotions. It's okay if I understand. If the agenda is clear, no problem. But if it's not, then I can...
You get angry.
Yes, I get very angry.
I've never seen you angry.
No, but try to make a film like that, and then you will see me.
Okay, so just to move on a little bit, maybe another question, sorry. Yes?
I was curious about your definition of a character, and if it could include something beyond a human or...
Sorry, I have a very bad hearing. Could you speak up?
I'll try to shout. I'm just curious about your definition of a character, and if it can include, beyond a human or an animal, can it be a place?
If it can be a place.
Yeah, it can be beyond, if a character can be something beyond a human human being.
Yeah. Now I'm a little worried, because I'm sure we would have very different answers to that. Well, no, for me it can't. For me, and that comes back to the character driven, because I don't think a place can drive a film. I'm not saying that you cannot make a film about a place. The film you brought when we met the first time was very much about a place. Also the people in it, but it was not character driven in that sense. But then the director has to drive the film. I mean, a director always drives the film, but what a contradiction! Yeah, but then the way you film the different corners of the hotel and spot that lonely little guy over there, that green table, and all that, then the director makes me experience something about the place, and that can be very, very beautiful. But it's not the same as character. In my definition, it is a human being, and it also means that, which can be very beautiful, it also means that it's different then, because then you're driving the film. So it's not a character-driven anymore.
Yeah, but I think
it's a film. It's a film with characters in it, which for me is something different.
Yeah. But still, I think even for those of you who are not making character-driven films the way Mikael describes it, this book is still really, really interesting.
And could I just say that because it's very important that we're not limit. I'm not trying to limit anything. I'm just trying to make us conscious about what we're doing. If I choose this, what does it mean for my film? What does it mean for my artistic room of maneuvering? That's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make, the beautiful genre of documentaries.
Yeah, narrow it down. Yeah.
No. Yes. But it's just that, okay, if this one I'm doing, what are the consequences? That's the only thing I'm trying to. And that's why I use a character as something specific, because I think that then determines how you can work with it as a director.
Yeah, so it's a
in
direction.
opposition to if you're working with the place, then it's something different.
Yeah, so it's a specific direction of filmmaking.
Yeah.
I want to. Any questions? Any more questions? Yes, please. Okay.
Thank you, Edric.
Mikael, I know that you, of course, tutor in the workshops, and you do a lot of the spoken workshops, so you talk about things. Have you ever considered doing podcast?
Doing what?
Podcast.
Podcast?
Yeah, because we are living in an age of new media and everything. And I know that you already wrote a book about Niels Bohr, but were you ever considering other format? Maybe something character-driven?
No, I have never considered that. But if you will be the producer of it, I'll be happy to do it. That's a deal.
Sorry.
Maria and I know each other from previous sessions. No, I just never consider it, but it sounds interesting.
Okay. Well, one more question, and then I have a question.
So with this, you've got your character, and there's the past, and where you are now. And
Could you take the mic a little closer?
Is that okay? Yeah. So if you've got a character, and there was a big explosion in the past a few years ago, like the big catalyst to put them on the new journey, and do you think you need to make a decision about what kind of film you're making before you start, if you see what I mean? Because you could either go back and reflexively tell the past who they were, the huge transformation, or you could simultaneously be following to try and show in an observational way the effects. But it's a big gamble because it might be so slow because... So yeah, do you think you need to be just honest and decide on the style before you start?
If I heard you right, you're talking about something in the past that is not possible to film. How do we get that into the film? That was the basis of your question?
Yeah. Do you have to decide whether you're going to reflexively tell that?
Yeah. I just think that you have to decide on the form. That's one thing. We all know that in the beginning of a film, you make a promise about the form, and if you then suddenly change it, it doesn't feel right. But it's more that I come back to this. What was it, Nils?
Authentic now.
Authentic now. That it takes very little for me to get out of the emotional presence. The authentic now. Very often something makes me remember that I'm watching a film. And I think that is a decision that you need to take as a director. Do you want me to, or don't you? It can be, it very often happens, that you need to tell something from the past and you have to tell it. You have to tell it. Then, of course, you need to find a way, and that can be many ways. And if you can't get it into the observational style, you have to drop the observational style if you want to have it in. I'm not saying that you have to stick to the observational style, but I just think that my only point is that it comes with a cost, I think. What we see a lot these days are the personal films, where the director is also one of the characters. And that, of course, gives a beautiful possibility because then you can direct yourself and you can do as they do in fiction. You can sneak in the information that you need in lines that are not about the information, but you understand it because it's the subtext of the lines. We see that a lot, and I think it's a way of working with that. But I think it's very difficult to make those kind of voiceover because you are both a character. Mohammed, we talked about it. You are both a character and a director. So you tend to write the lines of the voiceover a little, here comes the director sneaking in, you know. And we sort of lose the authenticity of the character, of the moment of the character. So I think that's, I keep coming back to that. And because I work with film, I'm very conscious about it. And I think 99% of the audience who don't work with film are not conscious about it, but I think we perceive it unconsciously. I really think we do.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I have a question, which is kind of a little bit moving a little bit forward to another subject, right? So in your, when you look at the index and in your book, basically I see it in two parts. The first part is about the creative process, and the second part is about packaging and selling a film project.
Packaging? You want to ask me about packaging?
Packaging. No, I mean packaging. By packaging, I mean writing a treatment, pitching it, making it. Yeah.
Because I think packaging is something about distribution stuff.
I know. Sorry.
I don't know anything about that.
I meant presenting it. Presenting it, to sell it, to get money for it, etc.
Yes. Okay.
So and I was wondering, does this fact that we need to sell film projects, does it influence our stories or our subtexts? And as the competition to sell projects grows, more people are making films. How does it have an impact on the film tendencies in general?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think it does, and as long as we do it with open eyes, I think it's okay. That's maybe one of the things, because my background is producing. It's not editing or directing or anything, so it doesn't come from the creative side as such. And when we discuss, so very often when I meet a project, it's the producer and it's the director. And I think the important thing is just that we have to take conscious decisions. You know,
what do you mean? Sorry, what do you mean by conscious decisions?
I mean, for instance, there was last year, I think it was at Baltic Sea Docks, one of the places that we've also been together, where I had a discussion with a director and a producer, and they had made the film black and white. And I just told them, you just cut off 90% of the broadcasters. And I remember a little later, the director told me, or said, Mikael told me not to make it in black and white. But that's not what I said. I just said, if you want to do it in black and white, you just need to know the consequences of that. And that's why it's so important to have the producer and the director together, because that discussion, if you have that as one person, it's an impossible discussion. But if you could have it between two persons, then it's not an impossible discussion. So yes, I really, really think that you have to pay attention to the distribution, and you have to decide with yourself as a director, do I want to do this for the sake of the distribution? I think it's totally okay, but it's something different.
Yeah, and I think it also defines the tendencies of filmmaking. I don't know, of course there are some filmmakers who can kind of, I wouldn't say resist, but kind of be okay with a low budget and pursue their very independent vision. But it's also very comfortable to try to adjust to the needs or demands of the funds or broadcasters and conform with them. And I don't mean a bad way, but and I was just curious how much it actually affects the global filmmaking tendencies.
Yeah, I think it affects it a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult about the future, because public broadcasters have been the important source of distribution and financing for some decades, and the broadcasters. And I think it's totally fair. I'm not criticizing anything. They would like the film to fit the slot. Of course they do. You know, I once called a broadcaster a financier, and she said, "I'm not your fucking financier. I've spent 30 years of building this slot so that people know what it is. They turn on their TV without knowing what's in it, because I have been able to label my slot so they know that something interesting will come." I think it's totally fair. So I just think that it's a decision between the two parts, whether you can meet each other. But of course it influences. Of course it does. I mean, who don't want to have your films? I know that there are some who says it doesn't matter. Come on, having your film shown to so many people, it must be a wonderful. Isn't it a wonderful feeling?
Yeah,
yes,
it is.
Yes. So you have to decide whether.
But it's also fine if the film doesn't have a large audience, and you just pursue your kind of dream, and you make a film, but maybe 10 people see it. But I also think it's okay if only 10 people see it, appreciate it.
Yeah. But as long as it's your decision, then it's fine.
Yeah, it is a decision. Yes.
Yeah. So that's actually my only point. That if you want to have a big audience. It might be that grows out of the film you want to make, and sometimes it doesn't. And then, do you want to change it to having a big audience, or do you just want to make it for those 10 peoples over there in the corner?
Yeah.
and you just have to decide.
Yeah, it's a decision.
Yeah. But
it's,
there's a big pressure on you
yeah, it is.
for not just making it for those 10 people.
Exactly,
over
it is
there.
a big pressure for,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
And that is very, very difficult to stand against that if you are new.
Yep.
If you are successful and have made hundreds of successful films like you have, it's much easier, right?
Yes.
So we also have to acknowledge that.
Yes, yeah.
And I think, again, if I can refer to Niels P. Andersen, I discussed my book with him, and he said, I think the most important role for the producer is to protect the director. And by that he means the producer should let people in to the director's space at the right time. And it's about opening some doors. It's not about having the space open. It's about opening the doors at the right time. And by people, I mean, can be commissioning editors, but it can also be, you know, other colleagues or the DOP, or, you know, it's, I think there's something right about that.
I agree, and actually an experienced producer, and what I have experienced myself, which has been really great, an experienced producer can protect a young filmmaker by presenting the film in the right shade to a commissioning editor. And giving the
Your
work.
first film was with Deckard.
Yeah.
Heino Deckard. He's a very experienced producer. You must have been
that was
through
the case I was speaking about. Yeah. When the commissioning editor came into the rough cut, and it's not a really television film, and we had a commissioning editor from television. As soon as we finished filming, Heino stood up and he said, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is wonderful." And right away, the commissioning editor said, "Yes, this is wonderful."
Oh, is it? Yeah.
So anyway, it's you mentioned producer, so it is actually a really great ability for a skill for a producer, for especially an experienced one who somebody can trust to present a film that is less conventional in the right way to the commissioning editor or funders.
I was once with a group of directors, and I asked them, what are the skills that you expect from your producer? And I had a big whiteboard, and it took 5 minutes. And there was no empty spaces on the whiteboard. And the interesting thing that almost all of them were about this, the relationship. Of course, it was also about getting financing. I mean, come on, of course. But that was not the first things they said. It was about a lot of other things that the producer, that they expect from their producer. It's a very, very multifaceted thing to be a producer.
Yeah. So, sorry, there was a question. Yes, please.
Mikael, you made, as mentioned, this gentleman already, the interesting distinction between person and character. And then you said in a sort of sideline, but of course the character doesn't drive the documentary, it's the director. So, director is turning in the process the person to a character. This actually, it could be a conversation about developing character in documentary. And what can you say about the options for a director for the turning the persons, of making persons to a character, so that then the character drives the film?
Yeah, it's a very complicated thing, because I think what very, very, very often happens is that we want to make a film about this. And then if we decide to make it character-driven, then it's because we feel that that person potentially holds that story that we're curious about.
Sometimes you don't know already beforehand that it is.
Of course you don't, but you spot it, and you think that might be the case, and then along the road you might find out that by following that character or that person, your film is different. You're not making a film about what you thought. So I think that is maybe the most crucial, one of the crucial decisions for a director. Do I want to keep on following the character, acknowledging that my film is about something else? I thought it was about hate, it's about love. Or do I want to find another character that will enable me to make the film about hate? I have endless admiration for documentary directors, because I think that ability to stay true to the film you wanted to make, and then along. So that's an element of decision, and then at the same time having that openness that will make you understand. No, I'm not making a film about that. So in that sense, that's what I mean by character-driven. That if you stick with the character defines a lot of things. From the subtext, you can still keep a certain focus, but you have to follow the character. That's what I mean by character-driven. If I come back to the quantum mechanics and Niels Bohr, 100 years ago or something like that, scientists finally acknowledged that a wave can be understood both as a dot. No, sorry, that light can be measured both as a wave and dot. And that is not possible. But they had to acknowledge that that was the case. So it was a long journey for the scientists to get there, to acknowledge it. I think it's the same with character-driven film, that you have to stay open. It's the same with the process of being a director and a character-driven film. You have to stay open, but you also have to have your firm decision at the same time. So it's going between the wave and the dot all the time. I expect that would be the process of, if you stick to this is what my film is about, then we can see it on the screen that it's not, because it's not embodied in the person that you're following. So it's very interesting
it is a dialogue.
Contradiction.
The creation process. It's a dialogue between yourself and the
exactly.
material or the reality, or even in editing.
Because sometimes you only find out in editing when the editor comes in and says, you say, look at this scene that holds this, and the editor says, no, that's not in the scene.
Yeah, there's nothing there.
And then it's maybe too late, right?
Yeah. Yes. So another question. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, but we started 10 minutes later, so we can take 10 minutes extra.
Of course we can.
So yes, please, there is a question there.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to ask, how does that work when you're dealing with multiple characters? So if you have, say, 6, 7 different characters, and not one of them is the hero of the story, then what drives it, and how do you develop that?
You want to answer that? I think fundamentally it doesn't change anything about this interesting difference between filming events that take place in a person's life and staying true to that, and at the same time constructing a story by constructing a character. I don't think it changes anything about that, the basics of character-driven. I think it makes it different in the way that it's more difficult to identify. I mean, it's more difficult for you as a director to give space enough for me to identify with that many characters. I think that's one thing that probably comes with it. Another thing is that as I understand it, what you do by having different characters is that they together create an imaginary leading character. I imagine that that's what happens in our heads when we see the film, that then they come together as one, not if it's two, because if it's two, they oppose each other. I don't know if this is right, but I think that's probably what often happens. If you have two characters, they sort of, they mirror two different positions. But if you have multiple, I guess it's more this that happens, that they come together as one imaginary character. Is that right?
Or the audience starts to identify with one of them. I mean, it is more of a complicated task, of course, maybe more interesting as well. But even if you have one character, the character is defined by his or her relationship with the environment and other people. So here you just put together a more complex structure, try to kind of define 7 people in their environment and the relationship with other characters as well.
And if we stick to my understanding of character, that you have to present a character with a past. If you have to do that for 7, I mean, you have some issue, huh? So I think it's more difficult for you as directors to do that. And the thing is that I'm the one who decides. I mean, the audience. I'm the one who decides who's the main character, you know. Because that's the one that I identify the most with.
Yep.
And that might not be the one that you see as your main character. I think there's also something there to consider when you have multiple characters.
I think that's really interesting
It's
as well.
very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
But you know, I get a little disappointed if I decide that it's character number 4, and he or she more or less vanishes out of the film throughout the film. You know.
Yeah, but it's kind of non-commercial narrative, which is also okay. You know?
Yeah. But yeah.
So another question. Well, if there is no more question, I have one question extra. Maybe briefly we can answer to that. We don't have much time. Yeah, I think but maybe very briefly, I just wanted to mention it. Now, there's a lot of talk about the consent of a protagonist recently, of a character in the film, and it's kind of an ethical issue, and but also this consent and all these release forms, it also a little bit maybe bureaucratizes the whole process. But anyway, just your take on this issue with this consent and release forms, and because sometimes we film characters who are not really collaborating, or who are not the perfect, nice people in the world as well.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the question of release forms is a very practical element. That's a practical element that many broadcasters wanted, requires it. And then you have to find out at what moment you want to do it, because it's a very radical thing for a person to fill out a release form. And we could talk a lot about that. What do you put into a release form and all that? But I guess this is not the time to do it.
Yep.
But there's a big difference for me whether I'm making a film about a person that invited me, I mean the film team, into his or her life. You would still need a release form, but you have to pay back on that trust. I said that earlier as well. Differently, it can still be character driven, but if you're making a film about one who actually don't want you, who did not invite you into his or her life, but you're still making a film about him or her, then I think it's different. I think it changes your ethical responsibility. You always have an ethical responsibility, but I think it changes it. I don't know if that was an answer to your question.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's a big issue for me. And I think maybe it's a topic for another talk, another 1 hour talk for sure.
No, but it is. I produced a film once about a famous director, and we showed it to him, and he said yes. Then we showed it a second time where his wife and his daughter was also there, and they told him to say no.
Yeah.
And then we had to take out some of the most beautiful scenes. Yeah. But I think that is the ethical responsibility that we have, that we cannot release a film where the characters, the persons who invited us in, don't agree. And then we have to take the consequences. I had some pretty tough fights with the financiers. The film commissioners and the commissioning editors and so on afterwards. But they did understand, but it was tough because they had also seen the version that he said yes to.
Yeah. Anyway,
there is no answer to that.
Yeah, there's
because
no answer.
What do you do as a producer? You have made a lot of contracts, you promised this and that, and then you come back to them and say, I cannot fulfill the contract. There's no answer to what you do.
Yeah. So anyway, it's kind of an open question, something to think about for all of us, the filmmakers, I think, in various directions. But something that we will not speak about today is football.
Yes.
What football has to do with it. I mean, It was one of the titles of the chapters. But after I read the book, I understood why you were a follower of football. And now
I will hire
watch
you
it
as
more.
my, I'm distributing this book myself. I will hire you as my agent because that was a cliffhanger you can only find out by reading the book.
By
right?
reading
Yeah.
the book, yeah, exactly. And yeah, just final thing, because we need to wrap it up. Where can one get your book, The Uncertainty?
I have 12 copies here. And then what I've done is that I have a list. I have a schedule where people can write their names, and I will send it to you. It costs 10 euros. For now, I have, of course, the physical print, and then I have a PDF. That's the only digital version I have for now. It looks okay.
Yeah,
it can go full screen.
Yeah.
But I will try to find out how to make an ebook, because that is, of course, better. But I didn't.
That's a new challenge, new things to learn.
Yes,
right?
I didn't find out yet.
Okay,
Yeah.
but people here, they can sign up.
They can sign up for it, and I will
for the
send
book.
them a physical print. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mikael. It
Thank
was
you
a
very
pleasure
much,
to speak
Selma.
with
It
you.
was a
Congratulations
pleasure.
again with this book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salome and Mikael, and I urge you to come up to sign up if you haven't got the book yet. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.